Great. Awesome. So I'm definitely happy to be back here again. This is my 4th California Seth Conference and the 3rd one that I'm speaking at. And the 2 previous presentations were also on out-of-body, and I'm really happy to continue and perhaps conclude the topic for this year. And so what I'm going to be going into this year is going to be advanced explorations. And sometimes the question that comes to me, why do I love out-of-body experiences so much and playing with those states of consciousness? And part of it brings me back time and time again to a Seth quote that I really appreciate, and I've probably shared it 2 years ago. Seth speaks to us saying, projections, out-of-body experiences, involve many more aspects of the whole self and are a mark that the personality is progressing in important ways. The inner senses are allowed their greatest freedom in projection states, and the whole self retains experience that it would not otherwise. When this knowledge becomes part of the usual waking consciousness, that is, when you realize what you have done, then you have taken a gigantic step forward. Every time I see this quote, I realize that out-of-body experiences are one doorway through which we can really get to know the inner self on a very deep, personal, and intimate level. And just to go into those states, into those highly pleasurable and ecstatic states of being out of the body and really feeling more of your whole self flowing through you is really, that kind of mystical experience is for me, it's a very profound and something that just continues to interest me and continues to deepen in my daily life. So Seth says there are no divisions to the self, and I really feel that when we're in a projected state, we're actually becoming much more aware of those multi-layers of the self, and the environments through which we travel just give us a much vaster picture, and then we can take that knowledge back into our physically oriented self and integrate it into the personality. So we experience a greater sense of the self, of course, and a greater connection to all that is, and some of those mysterious questions begin to at least get a glimmer of answers. Of course, they are never answered, but through these states we come to actually really get a much broader perspective than we have had before. And continuing that same quote, Seth gives us the outline, basically what opens the doorway to these profound experiences. He says basically it's our determination that opens that doorway. He says an almost automatic determination must be set up, however, if projections with conscious awareness are to be anything but rare oddities. And that's where the practices come in. If we just kind of live through life, day-to-day living, and not put much energy into getting to know the inner self through these various doorways, not much is going to happen until we actually start knocking on that door. There's a saying that, to he who knocks on the door, it shall be opened, and there's a lot of truth to that. And how do we knock on the door? And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about how do we knock on that door, but most of what I'm going to present today is what do we do once that door becomes opened, and that's where I'm going to talk about the advanced techniques. So the determination that Seth is talking about is not that angst-ridden, stressed, I have to get this done, why am I not achieving it kind of determination. He's talking about cool, calm, collected determination. It's almost like a sense that projection is inevitable by just simply applying a little bit of focus. And so like Seth also says, you get what you concentrate upon. So if you concentrate upon this being a very easy, joyful experience, then it becomes so. If you concentrate upon the difficulties that it entails, then that's what you're going to get in your reality. So obviously, determination and focus, that's the key. Last year's talk, I talked about the indirect method, which I'm going to review a little bit at the end of this presentation, because my hope is that most of you take this into the experiential realm and not just the theoretical realm by just sitting here and talking about possibilities and probabilities, but rather to integrate it into your daily lives. So I'll review that a little bit. It was borrowed out of Michael Radaga's book, The Phase, which is an excellent manual of techniques about out-of-body states. A brief review, the indirect method uses the last 2 hours of sleep for projection states, and it uses an algorithm of several techniques combined into one, and that's what makes it so incredibly successful. And it's something you can practice every time you wake up in the morning. So it's accessible to anyone and everyone. At this year's talk, like I said, I'm going to focus more on the advanced techniques, So we're going to start with simple techniques like how to create objects to more advanced techniques like traveling through different times and places and spaces. For those of you who have seen my previous talk, it's up on YouTube from 2013. There's a 2014 talk that covers the indirect method in depth, and I'm hoping to post that soon. And then I also hope to get this talks up there as well soon. And those of you who are interested in further, I have a 5.5 hour MP3 CD audio in the back as well. So how to get ourselves into the state. So usually it's pretty easy to get to the point where you've projected, you become kind of surprised, oh my god, I did it, but now what? And that's kind of where my presentation is going to start this year. It's going to take off and pick up where I left off last year. Deepening is a process through which we can fine-tune ourselves into that out-of-body state. So usually when people go out of body, they become startled, they become surprised, or they become just amazed. And by just the very nature of not being able to dial our frequency, our consciousness to that particular frequency of reality construction, we get popped right back out into the physical body, or we get pulled into unconscious dreaming. So the process of deepening is like tuning an analog radio, for those of you who remember. It's like tuning right into that specific frequency so you get the clear reception. Blurry vision is going to become clear, your hearing is going to become more acute, the body, the energy body that you're in is going to become quick, mobile, nimble. Otherwise, it can become encumbered in various ways until we really fine-tune our consciousness. So our inner senses, we all know from being readers of Seth, they're very, very vast in scope. But in many projection states, they're actually going to be translated into the camouflage of the 5 senses that we're familiar with. And it's the seeming 5 senses out of body that we're going to use to fine-tune ourselves into a more stable reality construction. So, when do I deepen? Obviously, it's right when you separate from the body. If you wait even 2-3 seconds, you might be popped right back into the body. So you have to really lock into that frequency, because at first it's like you have that radio dial kind of spinning all over the place, going between physical to unconscious dreaming, and you kind of have to lock it right in. And then you can stabilize. Once you stabilize in the experience, it becomes relatively easy to continue the experience. Basically, the deepening process is going to help us to prolong the out-of-body state and also to make it more full, more realistic, and even hyper-realistic to our perceiving self. Why do we do it? I touched upon it briefly. Without deepening, you're going to have a much, much shorter experience out of body. You're going to be suddenly transported into the body or into unconscious dreaming. You might experience a dual consciousness or dual awareness, where part of your consciousness is in the physical body and part of your consciousness is in your non-physical energy body vehicle. And so sometimes you can be kind of caught in between 2 worlds. When you deepen, you can swing your perceptions into the out-of-body state more fully and more clearly so that you can be more free to explore. Sometimes your consciousness, when you pop out of body, you're going to be very sluggish feeling, unclear, a little bit hazy, and lacking clarity and focus. So the deepening is going to help us to really fine-tune ourselves right into that state. And the art of deepening, essentially, one little trick is when you start to separate from the body, the first thing you want to do is adopt a pose that is not similar to the physical body. So if you're laying in bed and you start to feel yourself levitating, you know, one of the first things you want to do is rotate yourself either a 90 or 180 degree on this axis or on the other axis. If you take the physical body or the energy body and move it out of range of the physical, you're going to have a much easier time to separate. And then you want to immediately begin to perform what we call sensory amplification, and that's using the senses that you have. It's either going to be your feeling sense or your visual sense, or a combination of the two, to dial yourself into that state. And so palpation is your primary deepening skill. Sometimes when you're out of body, you find that your vision can be incredibly hazy, or you might find yourself that it appears that you have vision, but you're staring out at nothingness. But yet you perceive yourself as being in another vehicle besides your physical one. What you want to do is just start to reach out. It's going to feel like you have no vision, but you're going to start reaching out and feeling for objects. And if you don't find any next to you, the first thing you can feel is the floor, because you're usually going to be standing on something. And so you want to keep those hands moving, and you want to really increase your tactile sensation. So if I was standing at this podium, I'd be reaching it and touching it and really trying to feel it. And focus creates reality. So when we focus into a construction, it literally takes on more momentum, more energy, more consciousness. And so then those objects are going to it's like developing a Polaroid film. They're just going to start appearing right in front of our eyes. So we want to focus on our senses as much as possible. Some other techniques that work is actually rubbing the hands together. This one comes up over and over in the literature. It's a very useful way of stimulating the kinesthetic sense, the palpatory sense. Some other ideas, feeling the floor, feeling the carpet, feeling for the walls. You can also just feel your body also as a way of just really tuning yourself to that state. Another thing that's really effective is blowing on your hands. It's another way of stimulating the sensory feeling sense. All of those are going to help the environment to crystallize and to stabilize all around you. And the other technique is peering, or the visual sense, really stimulating your vision, locking into objects with the eyes. And something that's really effective is actually holding something in front of your eyes very closely. So it can mean like coming up to a wall and looking at the details, coming up to your hands and putting them right in front of your face and just really looking at all the details. And that also, the visual sense, helps you to dial in to that particular frame of consciousness. And the main thing you want to keep in mind is if you just stare at your hand kind of idly, you're going to start perhaps drifting into unconscious sleep or into your physical body. So what you want to do is keep an active, you want to consistently agitate your senses. And that agitation or the use of those inner senses, those inner pathways of perception, is what's going to hold you at that particular frequency, that you can stay in that environment. So if you don't have vision, like I said, if you stare at your palms, because some out-of-body states, most of the time you're going to have your vision with you, but there's going to be some situations where you're out but there is no vision. If you stare at your hands and just allow your vision to begin to notice them more and more and more, it's like I said, it's going to feel like they're being developed on Polaroid film. So that's one way to get the visual sense to come in more clearly. In terms of combining the two, that's kind of an obvious no-brainer, is that when you combine feeling with vision, you're going to very strongly dial yourself right into the exact state you want to be on. Seth says we get what we concentrate upon, and so when we concentrate upon the reality construction that's taking place in the out-of-body state, we're actually going to give it more mass, more momentum, more energy, and it's going to crystallize all around us in a more stable way. Other deepening techniques, lots of these techniques are actually quite similar across the board. A lot of these techniques that cause you to get out of the body in the first place are also very similar to the techniques that you use to deepen your state. And so an aggressive form of action can really help. This one has helped me on a number of times. When I find myself kind of fading in and out of that out-of-body state, all of a sudden, if you really work your energy body, you do some vigorous exercise like jumping, running, something that really locks your perception into that energy body, you're going to be your consciousness, all of your consciousness will flood that temporary vehicle of consciousness, and you're going to awaken within it. And your reality is going to crystallize around you as a result. The other one is, of course, a more visual one, is that you vividly imagine intensely a place in the physical world you're familiar with. This is going to sound a lot like William Bielman's target technique that he uses to get out of the body. It's also a useful technique to get you to really dial into the right state. And that's going to cause that particular reality to crystallize around you. And so you can use a combination, such as like working out at your favorite gym, or running in your favorite place, or just anything like swimming at your favorite pool. Just combining the visual with the kinesthetic motion is going to help stabilize. And then from there, you can do whatever you choose to decide. It's definitely great to have a plan of action beforehand. Otherwise, once you deepen yourself into the state, you might just be at a loss of what to do, just suddenly finding yourself in a mystical state and a mystical experience. And sometimes staying idle is the very thing that pulls you either into unconscious dreaming or back into the physical body. So whatever you're doing, you want to create a sense of motion and a sense of really using those physical or those non-physical senses. It's a lot like training muscles. Anything, the more you use them, the more you're going to be comfortable with them. At first, you're going to feel like you're kind of learning to crawl all over again, even though you're essentially relearning to use faculties that are your own to begin with. It's still going to feel like you're going to need to reacquaint yourself with the use of these inner senses when you first find yourself in these other realities. A quick summary of deepening is once you're out of the body, you want to immediately start to palpate your surroundings, focus intensely on your sense of touch, and also use your vision to scrutinize objects. And just inches away is a nice trick. One trick I like to use is either my hands. It's a very powerful way of locking yourself into a certain state out of body. But also looking at walls, looking at the patternings on the walls can also be beneficial. Keep feeling, keep moving, keep taking in more, and stay active in your use of those inner senses. And use the kinesthetic visual combination as intensely as possible. And that's what's going to let the environment crystallize and stabilize all around us. So essentially what we're doing is we're focusing our environment into being, and it's our focus that causes it to materialize all around us. The art of maintaining is a bit like the art of deepening. The fact is, once you deepen, and then you go off and do whatever it is you plan to do or spontaneously decide to do, you want to keep some portion of your awareness consistently activating those inner senses so that you don't fall into unconscious dreaming or pop back into the body. To maintain is just to continue some level of deepening throughout your entire out-of-body experience. That means keeping the perceptions active and agitated and engaged. And so the main thing you don't want to do is to become idle. Like sometimes you can kind of become idle and not be sure what to do, or start staring at something without changing your perception around, and that's what can cause you to pop right back out. So continue to touch, to examine objects and surroundings. And definitely if you feel yourself starting to be pulled back to the physical, which is definitely going to happen from time to time, if you engage vigorously in a deepening technique, you're going to find yourself restabilizing back into the out-of-body state. Besides all that, like I said, if you do have a plan of action, it's going to give you something to do while out. And also the momentum of a plan of action can also hold you in the state. Some examples, let's say you're walking along in a hallway. So one way to continue deepening is continue to run your hand along a wall as you walk. You can walk while rubbing your hands together as a way to continue maintaining your consciousness in the energy body. Basically, you want to stay focused on your surroundings or on your energy body. And at any point you feel that sudden pull back to the physical, you just deepen vigorously and consistently, and that will tend to pull you back into the non-physical. Another trick that I've used before and is very effective is when you feel yourself being pulled back into your physical body, is you literally just grab an object, a non-material object, and you hold on to it in your non-physical hand as you're being pulled back into your body. And you're going to find that once you're in your body, you perceive yourself in the physical body, your phantom hand will still be holding onto that object. And this is a really awesome trick, because once you already have that awareness of the phantom hand, from there it's much easier to project back out than if you completely come awake into the physical body. So basically you just grab any object, it can be a curtain, it can be, whatever's around you. You can grab your own hand if there's nothing else around you, and just hold on to that and maintain that. And it's surprisingly easy. It sounds, like maybe you'll lose that consciousness, but you actually don't. Once you return to the body, you're still aware of this for quite a long time, until you just either allow it to dissolve or you do something with it by returning back to the out-of-body state. So definitely secondary projections are incredibly easy once you return to the body. So lots of people miss the golden portal of reprojecting again. They come back, they want to write down their dreams or write down their experience, and say, oh, I don't want to forget. So, and then by then you've completely lost the state. But if you come back into the physical, if you do your getting out techniques then and there, it's boom, you just get right back out. And you can do that repeatedly 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. And you'll be surprised how easy it is and how sometimes you just don't think of it. So remember that one. Another tips and tricks for maintaining is the resistance to falling asleep. This is a possible complication, is that you just go, you drift, you get so involved in the action of the out-of-body state, you slowly drift into unconscious dreaming. and just maintaining a presence, just a simple presence of I could fall into unconscious dreaming and I'm going to stay present. Like that alone can keep you from going into unconscious dreaming. So from time to time, kind of do a check-in, mental check-in. Am I still awake? Am I still lucid? Is my fully conscious self still here? And the more you kind of scrutinize the events you're doing in your out-of-body state, the more you're going to keep that conscious presence there with you. And then also something that happens from time to time is false awakenings. Sometimes you get kind of gypped out of a good time because you think you've woken up, but you haven't, until you really wake up and you're like, oh man. So you can perform reality checks to check for false awakenings. One way to do that is through hyper-concentration on, you pick a very specific point, and within a short amount of time it's going to start to morph and change if you're out of body. And the other thing is if you do have any doubt, that's one of the indicators that you're actually still out of body, because generally when you return to the physical, you're quite certain that you're in a physical plane. But if you're doubting, like, is this a false awakening? Chances are it is. You can attempt seemingly impossible physical actions to test. So obviously levitation, flight, all of that, if you can perform those, that's an immediate test. The other one I've heard that's successful is pinching the nose and trying to breathe through the nose. I haven't tried it myself, but I've came across it in several aspects of the literature. The thing is, as we know as Seth readers, that beliefs create our realities, especially in these these environments that are very responsive to thought. And so our beliefs, if we really think we're physical, can also trick us. So that's something else to be aware of. And one last test for checking a false awakening is to check for inconsistencies. You're going to notice if you even if you've recreated your room perfectly in the astral plane, if you have a look around, you're going to it's hardly ever reproduced perfectly. There's going to be something that's going to be from another time period, from a different house you lived at. You know, the carpet's going to be blue instead of green. There's going to be some inconsistency there to let you know. Secondary separations from the body. Once you're already in the out-of-body state and you fall back into the physical, you're in the ideal state to reproject again. So don't miss that golden opportunity. And I've already explained earlier that you can have a third, a fourth, or fifth projection quite easily because upon the return, you're right in that frequency band that's the most conducive to project again. Now, in terms of some advanced techniques, I'm going to go from some rather simple ones to some more advanced ones. Finding objects is a relatively simple technique that I'll talk about. Finding people. Often people, once you're out of body, you get curious about meeting your friends or relatives, whether they're living or not. Obtaining information is another use of the projected state. Self-healing is something maybe not as well documented, but certainly a very, to me, just as a healer and a medical practitioner, this is a very, very creative use of this projected state. There's also just general creative development, as well as the ability to translocate, you know, to disapparate and apparate at any time and anywhere at will, which is a very pleasurable and fun skill to master. In terms of travel, your translocation skill is actually going to open up many possibilities, such as traveling anywhere in the physical world. Maybe there are places that you've always wanted to go that you haven't yet explored. This is one opportunity to do so. Exploring mythical places, exploring deep outer space. You know, time travel opens up to us, as well as inner self travel. And any other plan of action is, you know, fair game, whatever you choose to focus on. And it's the plan of action that is actually really important. If you're going to incubate lucid dreams and practice out-of-body techniques, it's nice to have several things you'd like to do. Maybe visit a physical place, maybe visit a mythical place. You know, write down a few so that when you're in the out-of-body state, you can immediately create a momentum and a trajectory within that state. Otherwise, you could easily just, you know, lose focus, lose consciousness, come back awake, or fall back into unconscious dreaming. Some ideas for plans of action include visiting masters, and could be masters of any craft. It doesn't have to be a master of a spiritual tradition. It could be a master of a martial art tradition or painting traditions, such as Jane Roberts would do, you know, tune in to the worldviews of different artists and philosophers and get information that way. You can play with your pet. This is actually, it seems simple enough, but it's incredibly fun to meet your beloved pet in an out-of-body state. You can visit a past or future home, place of employment, a mate, a friend, anything of that nature. Mythical places can be of interest to some of you. Hogwarts, Minas Tirith, Mount Olympus, and basically you can put anything there. And if one of those kind of tickles your fancy, that means your ability to focus into the techniques is going to be much stronger, versus that if you didn't have a plan of action, you don't have that momentum carrying you forward. So definitely get inspired about some plans of action, and then you'll have the momentum to actually go through with the techniques. And then my favorite, absolute favorite game out of body is to practice reality constructions. And so this is the ability to materialize and dematerialize objects with the mind. And somehow it's just, I find it to be like one of the most pleasurable states of consciousness to literally think of any object, have it appear in front of you, and then to dematerialize it, and then think of something else, have it appear in front of you, and then dematerialize it. It's kind of like a game that I like to play. And so all of you are going to have different ones that tickle your fancy. The more you have plans of actions, just that's going to fuel the inspiration. And of course, the sky is not the limit, as we know, in out-of-body states, so definitely get creative. Now, mastering some of these simpler advanced techniques, we're going to talk a little bit about finding objects. And so there's some simple ways of doing this. One way is if you don't want to directly confront your ability to materialize and dematerialize, you can materialize behind you. And so you pick any objects that you're desiring to see or to look at, or that you need for your adventure, and you picture it behind you, and then you turn around and then it's there. So that's one way to doing it without kind of getting stressed, like, is it going to happen? If you visualize it behind you or kind of around the corner, it kind of takes the emphasis off of the materialization, and then you just find it where you're looking for it. Another fun one to play with is materializing objects in the hand, because you can really engage your tactile sense. Otherwise, it's more of a visual sense, but to engage and to create through the tactile sensations can be another fun way. Obviously these are objects that have to fit in your hand, but it's a very fun game to play, is to actually literally feel the object morphing and materializing in your hand. There's the direct materialization, which I've shared, as well as practicing materialization and dematerialization, just going through the practice of calling forth objects and dematerializing them. The main thing to remember is it's your focus that causes materialization, and it's the unfocusing, the ability to unfocus, that causes their energy to disperse. And so sometimes closing your eyes can be helpful in materializing. So you're closing your non-physical eyes, and then choosing to materialize then and there, and then opening the eyes and then the objects in front of you. And so anytime you want to stabilize an object, you put your focus into it, and if you want to dematerialize, you withdraw your attention from it, and that's what causes it to fall out of your reality. And so like I said, these senses out of body, they mimic the five senses, but they are obviously much more dynamic than that. And so you get to this place of realizing that it's through the perceptive channels that you're actually creating these non-physical environments. And that's one of the beautiful benefits of out-of-body travel. Now, in terms of meeting people, finding people, this is a surprisingly easy technique. It's very similar to the finding objects technique, but it's even more simple than that, because all you really do is call forth the person's essence. You can call out their name, but more important is the emotional connection that you feel with them. So obviously it's going to be easier to connect to persons with whom you feel an emotional connection. And it's, like I said, it's surprisingly simple that you can just invoke a person's energy and you can easily find them in the out-of-body state. And it is the strong intent, the strong focus, and the strong desire and the emotion that calls people as well as objects to us in these out-of-body states. And just remember the golden phrase, we get what we concentrate upon. So whatever you choose to focus on in your mind is going to immediately materialize within this non-physical plane. And like I said, I love playing with my pet out of body from time to time, or in deep states of meditation. I can tune in to her. And so that can be fun for you animal lovers out there. I know you're out there. Otherwise, a great use for this technique is to contact people who perhaps live at a very far distance or who have crossed over into the the other side, and so you can make contact that way. There is also the idea of obtaining information in your out-of-body state. So obviously you're going to be exercising the inner channels, the inner perceptive channels, to obtain information from other layers of the self and from other layers of the universe. But they're going to come to you through in symbolic terms. And so books are like the primary symbol of knowledge in our times. And quickly the computer is also becoming, we Google things on the physical plane. On the astral plane, sometimes we receive information through these symbols, and it comes to us through like reading advanced texts, through looking through computers, or tuning in on TV channels, something like this. You can obviously go beyond the symbols, but they can be also useful. I've had many experiences where I'm actually picking up a book and looking at it, and it's written in a language that I can't understand, and yet I know I'm understanding as I'm reading it. And so it's just, in and of itself, that is a very pleasurable experience to undergo. So definitely don't just always try to go beyond the symbols. Sometimes it's fun to play with the symbols and receive the information through them. You can also receive information through people and through beings, non-physical beings, various experts, various guides, as well as your own inner self. This means visiting experts such as doctors, healers, angels, gods. It depends on your belief framework. Whatever your belief framework is going to be the one that's going to easily and readily materialize in the non-physical plane. And of course, visiting the inner self, or visiting some aspect of all that is also a very powerful, potential powerful experience. And how you visit the inner self, it's literally just like the finding people technique. You call upon the essence of inner self. You can say inner self now, and you'll literally just then be transported. It'll feel either like you're falling or you're going upwards, or some sense of momentum or motion, and you'll find yourself in a completely different environment. And last but not least, obtaining information from locations. You can visit locations to gain a sense of a future work engagement, lost pets, lost objects, future homes you might consider living in, and the out-of-body state. You can just will yourself to move into the future. Some of you will have more trouble than others working with this, depending on your belief systems about the malleability of time. Projecting backwards is oftentimes much easier for people than projecting forwards, but that, your beliefs are what create the experience. So in terms of further techniques, we're going to talk a little bit about this apparition technique, or the translocation. My favorite is to just translocate right when you're separating. So you feel yourself separating from the body. I just immediately envision the environment I want to find myself in, and then that just pulls me there directly. Otherwise, you can translocate using symbols. So a door is a powerful symbol in our physical time and space. And so you can use the door and imagine the place you want to go to being on the other side of the door. If the door is open, it can help if you close it a little bit. And then you just open the door and walk through with confidence, and you'll find yourself, anywhere, kind of like Neo in The Matrix. He opens the door and finds himself in the mountains. It's something like this. And actually, sometimes Hollywood actually very accurately depicts some of these states and possibilities and probabilities. Obviously, the problem is you need to have a door. So if you're out in the wilderness, you would have to materialize a door if you want to use this technique. There's just straight teleportation, where you will yourself to another place. And usually this is accompanied by a sensation of flight or transportation, like you feel yourself being pulled into the direction. You close your eyes and you visualize, whatever location you want to go to, and you feel this inner sense of immediate motion. And the more acute your focus, the more stable your focus, the easier it is for your consciousness to travel there. And if you're wavering in your, where you want to go, is this going to work? You're going to tend to find yourself either taking a really long time to get there, or finding yourself in environments other than what you originally intended. The environments you're going to be traveling through are incredibly thought responsive. So if there's any wobble in your thinking, you're going to have a wobble in the manifested reality that you're going to find yourself in. And then besides that, there's the technique, which is translocate by closing the eyes. This is not necessarily the same one where you feel yourself being pulled in that direction, there's a sense of travel. This is more like an immediate one. So literally you close the eyes, intend yourself somewhere else, open them again, and boom, you're there. So obviously the most simple of these techniques, but it utilizes much more of a kind of a free-form belief in your ability to travel anywhere and everywhere instantaneously in your non-physical vehicle. And like I said, the keys to all of these techniques are an unwavering focus and concentration. And if we waver or wobble in any way, that's essentially the reality that will come back to us, reflected back to us. In terms of travel, once we open up the ability to translocate in our out-of-body states, that opens up incredible potential in physical, time-space reality as well as non-physical places, past, present, and future places as well. And all of these are going to be limited by only your beliefs. So any place that you can imagine, you will be transported to there. My favorite power spot, believe it or not, it's incredibly simple. I love to find myself like either on a beach somewhere or kind of looking down at the ocean and just seeing the sun reflected on the water and just that amazing play of the blue and the sun reflecting. You know, as simple as that is, I find that like one of the most refreshing experiences. So you don't always have to go for these really crazy metaphysical places. You can pick power places or places to visit that are incredibly simple but perhaps very meaningful to you. Remember that the limits that we place, that we experience, the limits we experience are those that we place upon ourselves. And this becomes incredibly obvious in your out-of-body states. Now, one of my favorite ways, being a medical practitioner, to work with is self-healing. Definitely, the physical body responds very strongly to projection states. The way I've mostly used this is just as a recharge. If you go into an out-of-body state, you're automatically connected to a vast amount of energy passing and flowing through you. And the next morning when you wake up, you feel like man, there's just, you know, someone really turned up the volume on your personal energy level, because, you know, all those layers of the self that the personality has erected all these doors and windows and walls against, all of a sudden you have had access to them, and you just wake up incredibly refreshed from that experience. So the physical body definitely reacts to events out of body. And those of you know who have, you know, who really keep track of your dreams, obviously fearful dreams trigger all the fear response in the body, and really ecstatic dreams trigger all the, you know, the other chemical responses related to that state. So definitely during events out of body, various chemicals are released to the physical structure, and cellular changes are taking place in the physical body. Let's look at some of these techniques for healing. You could visit an expert, a doctor, or a healer in your out-of-body state. This is more of a way of externalizing your ability to heal. And so it's our intent, you know, just like with the finding people skill, our intent to find someone is going to be the momentum that carries us to the right person within that non-physical dimension. Then there's going to be taking medicine, various herbs, potions, creams, or drugs you can materialize. Once you master the ability to materialize and dematerialize objects, then you can materialize any objects you want, and therefore you can create your own medicines. And so you have to remember that medicine is ultimately a symbol of healing. And so it's you know, they're reality constructions, and you're creating that reality. And so as much reality as you put into it, that's how much effect it's going to have on you. And so the responsibility always comes back to you and your belief systems, but sometimes it's nice to externalize them and go through the ritual of taking the medicine and feeling the effect in your body. And the real trick to this is not just materializing the object, but also putting your intention, lining up your belief with it. And then once you take it or put the cream or you know, put it on your body or take it internally, really focus on the effect. And that's really where the healing takes place, is you're really bringing your awareness to the effect that the medicine is having on you, and that's the effect you will then begin to carry back into your body. Now, another thing to consider is sometimes things have considerable momentum in your physical reality. And so if you want to go about using out-of-body states for healing, what you want to do is create like a series of treatments, just like you would in physical reality. And it's through the momentum of repeated out-of-body experiences in which you're sending yourself those suggestions for healing that the healing will take place. Of course, there is a more direct approach, which is acting directly on your energy body. And so you can literally just take your hands and place it on whatever area of the body is ailing. Like, let's say it's your liver. You can literally encase your liver and begin to project, you know, loving, healing energy, kindness into it. And you're going to be very highly responsive to your thought suggestions and thought forms that you project into your energy body, and you're going to find a considerable effect from that. So you're going to infuse various techniques. White light is very common, a symbol of healing, or any sensations of warmth or just well-being that you can conjure and just put into that area. Something to consider is auto-suggestions. And of course, you can argue that every single healing technique I just shared with you is a form of auto-suggestion. And the truth is that it actually is. But the point is our body-mind is incredibly susceptible to and is highly suggestible to suggestions in the out-of-body state. So it's the ideal time to focus on one's healing. And so it's our level of focus, concentration, and belief that's going to create, and the expectation of the result that's going to create the reality that we want. There's one more I'm going to share with you, and that's psychology. The out-of-body states are places we can make peace with others, and especially dead or alive. And so some of you, and all of us, have probably had the experience of like, I wish I could have resolved that before they passed. And out-of-body states is the opportunity you can resolve it. And you can argue whether you're meeting the actual other dead person, or are you meeting a projection of your own mind. But at any rate, no matter what, the resolutions in these states can be incredibly profound and can be very useful in the sense of psychological healing. Projected states can be places where we face our own fears in a more, in a different type of environment than the physical one, working out our challenges there, as well as practicing new types of self-images and new types of activities in the out-of-body state, and that we can then later carry back into the physical. Some other areas to work with is creative development and fulfillment. Practicing skills. This is something I've definitely done, is I find myself sometimes doing Qigong out of body. Since I've been practicing Qigong for some 15 to 20 years, sometimes I find myself literally practicing the movements in an out-of-body state. And then when I return to the physical, I find that when I do it physically, it's like supercharged in a way that, I couldn't have gotten there just physically alone, or it would have taken a long time, and all of a sudden I'm infused with this extra understanding of energy and motion. And so it can be used for any types of sports, martial arts, surfing, or anything of that nature, if that is your desire. Some of my experiences practicing Qigong in the energy body is that you open up to the intuitions in a way that sometimes physically you're very distracted, even though you are working on the energy body while physical. So when you're in an out-of-body state, you're basically taking out the physical part of the equation and just purely focusing on the energy body. And so for those of you that are healers or energy workers, this can be an incredible pathway to learn more about the energy body that you're working on. For healers and body workers and medical practitioners, definitely an incredible opportunity to study the energetic template that resides behind the physical body. And one of the things that we really realize in out-of-body states is just how thought responsive the energy body is, and that the energy body itself is then the template for the physical. And so once we realize that, we start getting a better sense of how each thought literally changes electromagnetic and chemical properties in our physical body as well as our energy body. So we become a little bit more aware of how powerful thought is. Of course, fulfillments of desires and various forms of entertainment. The classic forms are, levitation, flying, and doing all kinds of acts that would be physically impossible. So that's another potential. For artists, once you learn to materialize and dematerialize, you can literally project your thoughts into manifested form and instantaneously see probable versions of art creations that you're considering. Whether it's painting, sculpture, the ability to project thought form into literal form you can see is an amazing skill that many artists can get excited about. Some other areas that I feel after some time will open up more and more is ideas like engineering, architecture, landscaping, the ability to project your mind into form that is immediately tangible in a non-physical environment can open up doorways for even creating various structures, various forms of architecture, or even landscaping, whether it's your own yard or trying to envision something much grander. Some of the keys to out-of-body experiences we're going to talk about. First one, of course, is your desire. you have to really fuel your desire to actually build enough momentum that you go home and try the techniques. There's focus, deliberate focus. There's the ability to stay consistent with the practices. They definitely gain momentum over time. And then your intention, just your felt intention to have the experience. And you definitely want to be in a wobble-free, unwavering, clear, consistent, and confident space when you go into these practices. And like Seth says, I've probably said it for the 5th or maybe even 10th time, we get what we concentrate upon. See, if you concentrate upon things being easy, they will be. And definitely our emotions and expectations paint the reality that we create. And so they act like magnets that literally pull those probabilities to us. And you want to definitely remember that we are literally creating the environments through which we travel when we're out of body. So the more we wobble, the more we're going to get unintended results in our reality constructions. And that being said, of course, there is such a thing as consensus realities, realities that have been set into motion before you experience them in your out-of-body state. And so those are going to be much less malleable and thought responsive, but still to some degree considerably more than the physical plane, which is a very dense version of a consensus reality. But generally speaking, we do get what we concentrate upon, and our expectations are what are going to shape our reality, whether in the body or out of it. A reminder from Seth, one of my favorite quotes from Seth is this one. And he says, your attitudes towards what is possible determines what is possible for you in very definite terms. Your attitudes create possibilities and impossibilities. It's a much longer quote that I won't go into the whole thing here, but definitely this one, I always come back to this one as basically he just spells it out for us. And so from here on out, I'm going to review a little bit about the indirect technique. Hopefully I've inspired all of you to some degree to try and make some attempts. And hopefully tomorrow you all will have amongst yourselves some good stories to share. So what I'm going to review now is the indirect technique for inducing out-of-body states. This technique is very powerful because it uses your natural 24-hour rhythm of waking and sleeping. So it's something that you can do every day, and you don't have to make any special arrangements. You can just do it. You can integrate it very easily into your normal living. This chart comes from Michael Radiga's book, The Phase, that I mentioned earlier. And there's going to be several techniques that go into an algorithm for this method. And what we're going to be using is right there, that area of really shallow sleep where REM is very prevalent. Some of the techniques, I went over them last year, and I'll just very quickly talk about each one. Phantom wiggling is literally when you, once you've woken up and you've attempted projection and it's unsuccessful, you start wiggling your phantom hand. And some of you will get immediate results, others of you will take a little time. So usually it's the hands, it can be the feet, it can be the face, any part. Usually the hands are the easiest ones to just activate your awareness of the energy body and not move your physical hand and just literally start to wiggle the etheric hand. From there you have rotation, which is more of a vestibular sense rather than a visual one. And that's when you're laying in bed, you awaken, and then you just imagine yourself beginning to rotate. Usually at first you can do like a 90-degree rotation with your mind. And after some time you can do 180 and eventually a full 360. And this is one technique that can help separate your energy body from the physical one. Kinesthetic motion, this is very similar to the deepening techniques I mentioned, which is imagining yourself vividly running, walking, jumping, doing gymnastics, or anything that strongly uses the energy body. Climbing rope is one of the better ones for that one. There is rubbing the hands. This is a deepening technique, but it is also a technique for going out of body, and so you're actually imagining rubbing the hands rather than obviously rubbing your physical ones. But it is something that can pull you into the kind of in-between state that is ideal for projections. There's observing images, and observing images is basically just your eyes are closed and you just passively stare out at the void between your eyes, and after some time some images will start to come. So keep in mind that you've just awakened and you have just drifted out of that REM sleep period, and you're in the hypnopompic state in between waking and sleeping. And so you're in that state that is highly, highly probable for all of these techniques to work. Hearing is more like an active form of viewing, and sometimes this is called the cell phone technique, because what you do is take an object that you hold regularly in your hand every day, And the familiarity of the object causes you to be able to materialize it very easily in front of your, with your eyes, with your visual sense. And once an image starts to appear, or once any of these start to work, then you would attempt your separation technique. Listening in, last but not least, is the technique of listening for the energetic sounds of the body. So it literally feels like you're taking your sense of hearing and turning it inward, and you're starting to listen intensely to the space that is your physical body. And as the technique starts to work, you're going to start to hear all kinds of buzzing, tingling sounds. And so each technique is actually only done for about 3 to 5 seconds, and then you go on to the next one. And that's where this algorithm is really, really highly effective, is because any one of these is a potential doorway, but we don't know which one's going to be the key that unlocks the door that day. And so you want to flip through them as much as possible, and the more that you try and repeat several times, then the more effective, the more your chance of popping out of body is. And this chart I shared last year also, what we're working with is this stage of sleep. And so what's very beneficial is if you take your normal sleep for about 6 hours or to 7 hours, but usually around 6. And what you're going to do is break that sleep in one way or another. You can break it with an alarm clock or set your internal alarm clock. And then you're going to wait 3 to 50 minutes, depending on how easily or more difficult you fall asleep. If you fall asleep difficult, then you're going to do the 3 minutes. If you fall asleep really easily, then you might want to wait a longer time just to bring more waking consciousness to you. And then you're going to work with the second sleep here. And that's where you're going to have many awakenings. And it's those awakenings precisely that you start to cycle through the techniques that I just talked about. Each one of these awakening points is going to be a potential doorway through which you can exit out of body. So you're going to have 3 to 4 to 5, 6, maybe even 7 opportunities to make an attempt. Something that really works for me, move yourself to another location, like the couch or the easy chair for the second sleep period. That brings even more waking consciousness to your sleep. The techniques are performed in an algorithm, so upon waking, during your second sleep, you're going to attempt to separate immediately, then and there, getting up, rolling out, levitation, or translocation. And if it's unsuccessful, then you cycle through those techniques that I just mentioned, and you're going to perform each technique for 3 to 5 seconds, and then move on to the next one. And what you're going to do is perform 2 to 4 of those techniques, and if they're not successful, you're going to repeat it 2 to 4 times again through the entire cycle. And then finally, if you're not successful, you just go back to sleep and try again, and you're going to have 3, 4, 5 more opportunities to try. You definitely want to attempt separation immediately upon waking, because most of you are going to have quite a lot of success just then and there without having to cycle through all the techniques. If it starts to work, you definitely want to amplify the technique that you're using. And when it reaches its maximum, kind of a crescendo, that's when you attempt your separation, whether through getting up, rolling out, levitation, or translocation. And if you're unsuccessful, go back to the technique that was working, amplify it again, attempt to separate again. And then finally, if you're unsuccessful again, you cycle through other techniques, because sometimes another technique will be exactly the key that you need. And finally, you can drift back to sleep if it's unsuccessful and start the whole thing all over again with the next awakening. The main thing to remember is that this method, if you practice it, you're going to have so many opportunities. And so you're stacking the deck in your favor that when you give yourself so much opportunities and so many different techniques that you try, visual ones, kinesthetic ones, and you cycle through them like this, you're going to have such a high probability of success that if you do this technique for a week every day, probably 70 to 90% of you would have some form of an out-of-body experience. How do I know if a technique is working? Of course, you feel sensations of a non-physical nature, whether you feel your phantom hand beginning to move, you feel the rotation become super real or much more real than just your imagination, or any sense of non-physical motion is your key that it's actually working. You're going to hear various vibrations and sounds, which is going to key you into the fact that your energy body is taking up your consciousness and starting to separate from your physical. And last but not least, various forms of imagery is going to start to appear and crystallize before you and materialize. And so all of these are indicators that you want to start to amplify the technique that's working and then separate from the body. Just as a general overview, you want to use the indirect method as much as possible for easy access. Upon awakening, you want to try separating first before you do techniques and then cycle them. Once out of body, you definitely want to deepen through the techniques that I shared with you. That's going to help stabilize you in that state. And then you want to continue maintaining. So while you're carrying out your plan of action, you might be walking around kind of rubbing the hands together gently, rubbing your hands on walls, from time to time touching your non-physical body. All of these are ways of keeping you locked into that frequency of consciousness. You want to have a plan of action. The plan of action is going to help you. One, is going to inspire you to do the techniques. And two, it's going to give you something to do once you're out, because sometimes you can be a little bit disoriented. And so having something to do, you can always change your mind, of course, but having a plan of action helps anchor you into a specific intention within that non-physical dimension. You want to attempt re-entry after each return to the body, because many people, like I said, miss this opportunity. Once you've fallen back into the body, you just want to just right then and there, boom, project again. I have some articles and the video on my website for those of you who are interested. I'm going to post this outline also on my website. You're going to be able to find it there. I know some of you sometimes like to have the slides as a way to review. If you've been fervently writing notes, sometimes just going back and having the slides, when you put the two together, it's going to kind of jog your memory of everything we covered here. And I want to close with some thoughts about determination. An almost automatic determination must be set up. And so what Seth is really encouraging us to do is actually to just take this and just apply it daily, daily, daily. And it's through daily application of the techniques that we build enough momentum that these experiences will start to happen even spontaneously and more regularly in our lives. And I've noticed from my own personal practice, when I do the techniques regularly, it doesn't have to be every day, but say 3 times a week, then I'll start to have out-of-body experiences during the practice of the techniques, as well as just spontaneous ones in the middle of the night. And I also noticed that when I withdraw my attention from these practices, that the whole thing just seems to really slow down and eventually kind of stagnate. So it's very, very responsive to our thoughts, to our intention, and to our just spending a little bit of focused time to induce these experiences. And I want to share one of my favorite Seth quotes with you all, talking about dream environments, which are synonymous to out-of-body environments. This is Seth from session somewhere in the 90s, 90-something. He says, each dream, first of all, begins with psychic energy which the dreamer transforms not into physical matter, but into a reality every bit as functional and as real. He forms the idea into a dream object or event with amazing discrimination, so that the object or event itself gains existence and exists in various dimensions. So every time I read that, I'm like, wow, we've really been gifted with the amazing creativity of the gods, literally, and we're able to set realities into motion in these other dimensions as well as the physical one. And he continues, it does not seem to exist in various dimensions. It does in actuality so exist. If a dream object or event straddles what you call not only time but space, and if, as I say, dream objects and creations maintain some independence from the dream, then you can see that although the dreamer creates his dreams for his own purposes, he nevertheless projects them outward in a psychic expansion. So literally every time we're dreaming, we're causing the expansion of the universe. We're literally creating worlds into being, and that's an amazing power that we have. And continuing that quote, the expansion again occurs as the dream drama is acted out. For the dreamer, a contraction occurs as he is finished with the events or drama for his own purposes, but no energy can be taken back. Energy projected into any kind of a construction cannot be recalled, but must follow the laws of the particular form into which it has been for the moment molded. Therefore, when the dreamer contracts his multi-realistic objects backward, ending for himself the dream that he has constructed, he ends it for himself only. The reality of the dream continues. And I do not care if the idea now appears impossible, the fact remains that it is so. So he's once again driving home that every single dream environment that we've ever constructed still exists and has its own energy and momentum and continues in its own terms to exist. So sometimes we think of, incredible artists that leave behind themselves incredible works of art, but think of the incredible works of art that we have left behind in the non-physical dimension as we dream every night and create these realities. And last part of that quote, the fact also remains that on other levels but conscious ones, you and every individual knows that the dream world is indeed constructed by the inner self with utmost care, with precision known only to the intuitions. And each individual knows that such a splendid creation as this then exists beyond the self that was its origin. So he's kind of looping it back into that understanding that we're constantly causing the universe to expand. And literally each thought, each emotion, each imagining is a part of that expansion. Each thought that we think, each daydream even that we have is constantly causing the universe to expand. So we're definitely given, I keep coming back to this phrase, given the gifts of the gods in our ability to literally create worlds into being. So with that, I hope that this talk has inspired some of you to make the process of creation much more conscious. Of course, all of us are dreamers, and we all dream at night, and we all daydream. So we're all causing the expansion of the universe to happen. But what is really important, I feel, is to become conscious of the act itself. And that's what causes the personality self to really begin to touch upon those other levels of the self and causes the personality itself to expand and to own its creative powers so that your physical life can be then infused with the creativity of the gods. So literally you're going to have all this non-physical source energy flowing through you and creating with you, and having that energy that creates worlds literally just flowing into your daily life, as opposed to having this little ego that's kind of building the walls, and here's my personality, and protecting for whatever reason from those vaster dimensions of the self. Like one powerful, powerful doorway to start breaking down that wall that the ego has erected is the out-of-body experience. And these techniques that I presented are so incredibly simple that literally everybody in this room has a high probability of having out-of-body experiences just by virtue of going through the algorithm. It's going to speak to some of you that are more, engineering inclined or software development inclined perhaps, because there's such a rhythmic method to it. And if you follow the algorithm as presented here, and you can read up on it further in Michael Radaga's Phase book, if you really follow the protocol, you're gonna open the door. It's just that simple. And you just want to remember, these states are states that are inherent to all of us, and all we have to do is knock, and the door shall be opened. So I hope tomorrow you will have many stories to share.